The year was 1887. The plains stretched wide and wordless under a bruised sky, and the evening train wailed through the valley like a wounded animal before it vanished into the horizon. On the splintered platform of Willow Creek Station sat Lily Mae Carter, 28 years old, wrapped in a pink dress that once promised a future brighter than dust. The letter in her trembling hands told her that promise had died somewhere between departure and arrival. Regret to inform you, arrangements cannot proceed. The ink had bled where her tears touched it, as if the words themselves were ashamed to be read. The platform was empty now, save for a tumbleweed rolling past, and the echo of iron wheels fading into forever. She waited long after there was nothing left to wait for, her hope breaking not with a cry, but with a slow collapse of her shoulders. When she finally rose, her small carpet bag felt heavier than her whole life. The air smelled of iron and sagebrush, and the sun had begun to bleed into the hills. Willow Creek was little more than a scatter of buildings against the endless land, a saloon, a general store, a chapel, and the promise of survival for those who could work or lie well enough to earn it. As Lily walked the dirt road toward town, her boots bit into the dust, leaving shallow prints that the wind hurried to erase. Behind every window, someone watched. By the time she reached the general store, lamps were flickering to life. Clara Hensley, the shopkeeper's wife, stood on the porch, arms folded like a gate. Her voice slid through the air, sugar over steel. "That her?" she asked no one and everyone. "The mail-order bride who got sent back like a bad shipment?" A ripple of laughter followed from the men nearby. Lily didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. She'd learned long ago that silence often bruised less than defense. Inside, she bought a loaf of bread with her last coin and stepped out before anyone could offer pity. Sheriff Amos Pike, a weathered man with kind eyes, tipped his hat as she passed. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the inn's got a spare room. You shouldn't be out alone." "I'll be fine," she murmured. "Always have been." But her voice wavered like a lantern flame in wind. She walked until the road thinned into shadow. Beyond the town, the chapel waited on a small rise, its white paint peeled to gray. She climbed the steps and tried the door, locked. Only the stone bench beneath the bell tower offered a place to rest. She sank onto it, her fingers still clutching the useless letter. Around her, the desert exhaled, cool air carrying the scent of wild sage, a chorus of crickets, the lonely cry of a coyote. She tilted her head toward the dark sky. "If you're still listening," she whispered, "just a roof tonight. That's all I ask." Her breath clouded the air, a fragile prayer rising into the vast indifference of heaven. A sound answered her, slow, deliberate. Hoofbeats. She turned. From the gloom emerged a horse, large and gray, its rider tall and broad-shouldered beneath a worn hat. He dismounted with quiet ease, his boots sinking into the dust. He didn't speak. For a long moment, they only stared at each other, two strangers measuring distance and danger in silence. Then he reached into his saddlebag and set something on the ground between them, a folded cloth, a small loaf of bread, and a tin of stew still warm enough to steam in the chill air. She blinked. "You're kind," she said. He shook his head. "Just passing by." His voice was low, steady, threaded with loneliness. He turned to go, but something in her tone stopped him. "Why help me?" The man hesitated, fingers brushing the reins. "Because no one helped me once." Then he mounted again, the horse's hooves fading into the silence he left behind. Lily stared at the food, the warmth of it radiating through the night. She ate slowly, tasting not only the bread, but the quiet mercy inside it. When she finally laid down on the bench, she felt the first flicker of something she had long forgotten. Safety. Morning came pale and gold. She woke stiff and cold, the bell above her head tolling softly in the wind. A rooster crowed somewhere far off. She gathered her carpetbag and followed the sound of a wagon creaking down the road. The same man sat atop it, reins loose in his calloused hands. He glanced at her, expression unreadable, eyes gray as river stones. "You shouldn't sleep outdoors," he said. "I had nowhere else," she replied. He studied her for a moment. "Barn's warm," he said finally. "Plenty of hay. You can stay there a while." She hesitated. Pride clawed at her chest, but desperation was the heavier weight. "Why would you trust a stranger?" "Don't," he said simply. "But no one deserves to freeze." They rode in silence along the dirt path that split the prairie. The wind combed through the grass. Crows rose and fell like black waves against the pale horizon. When the ranch came into view, a scatter of fences, a barn, a small house hunched against the wind, it looked both humble and eternal, as if it had grown from the soil itself. He stopped the wagon near the barn and offered a hand to help her down, but she ignored it, steadying herself. "Lily Mae Carter," she said softly. "Josh McKenna," he replied. The name suited him, plain, strong, carrying its own silence. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay, leather, and horse sweat. Dust drifted through the beams of sunlight, like golden smoke. Josh set a lantern on a crate, its glow catching the planes of his face. Handsome, but tired. The look of a man who'd wrestled too long with solitude. "This'll do," he said. "Blankets clean. Water's in the trough. Holler if you need anything." "I won't," she murmured. He nodded once and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, she asked, "Why live out here alone?" He paused. Some things grow better in silence. And then he was gone. She sat down on the pile of hay, wrapping herself in the rough blanket. The wind pushed against the walls, the boards creaking like old bones. She listened to it breathe through the cracks and thought of the man outside, his gentleness, his distance, the quiet sorrow in his eyes. Somewhere deep inside her, curiosity stirred. Later, when she peeked through the slats, she saw him by the corral, moving with patient strength. His hands, large and steady, soothed a restless mare. He spoke to the animal in tones soft as dusk, the same voice that had told her no one deserves to freeze. She didn't realize she was smiling until she caught herself and turned away. That night, the lantern's light trembled beside her as she lay down. The barn was full of sounds, horses shifting, the wind sighing, the slow heartbeat of the land itself. Sleep came fitfully, filled with strange dreams of warmth and open doors. Just before dawn, she woke to footsteps outside. A shadow crossed the slats, pausing near the entrance. The hinges groaned, and Josh's silhouette filled the frame, carrying something in his hand, a small, tattered quilt. He set it beside her, wordless as ever. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking in the half-light. He stood there for a heartbeat longer, the dawn bleeding behind him. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. "This town's not kind to people who don't belong." Then he left, the door closing softly behind him. Lily pulled the quilt close, her heart caught between fear and something that felt dangerously like hope. The wind outside rose and fell, carrying the faint sound of voices from town, gossip already traveling faster than forgiveness. She closed her eyes, knowing the world would soon come knocking. But for now, in that fragile silence, she let herself believe that maybe being unwanted had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. Morning came slow and silver across the plains, spilling through the cracks of the barn and settling softly over Lily Mae Carter. She woke to the scent of hay and the sound of roosters crowing somewhere beyond the ridge. For a moment she forgot where she was, half expecting the sharp voice of the world that had cast her aside. Instead, there was only the rustle of horses and the quiet thud of boots on dirt. Josh McKenna was already at work. Through the slats she saw him moving along the corral, shoulders broad, coat dusted with frost. His every gesture carried a steadiness that both comforted and unsettled her. When she stepped outside, the air cut clean against her skin, filled with the scent of pine and iron. Josh nodded once in greeting, tipping his hat but saying nothing. Between them stretched a silence that was not cruel, only careful, as though words might break the fragile peace they were building. She helped where she could, hauling buckets, mending torn feed sacks, sweeping the porch. He never asked her to, but he never stopped her either. Over days that turned into weeks, an unspoken rhythm settled between them. They shared morning coffee at opposite ends of a table, steam rising in the cold dawn. They worked side by side in the fields, speaking only when necessary. Each evening, as the sun dropped behind the far hills, she watched him from the doorway, the light gilding the roughness of his face and turning his silence into something almost holy. Sometimes she caught him glancing back, as if making sure she was still there. The townsfolk, of course, noticed. Clara Hensley's voice carried far, its sweetness sharpened with venom. "That girl's living under his roof," she told anyone who would listen. "Not even wed, not even proper." The gossip spread like wildfire through dry brush, and by the time it reached the sheriff's ears, it had turned into something darker. Amos Pike rode out one afternoon, dismounting with the care of a man who'd rather not deliver bad news. "Josh," he said, "folks are talking. Maybe send her to the inn before it turns ugly." Josh's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Lily stood by the well, feeling the weight of every whisper crash down upon her shoulders. Before she could speak, he said simply, "She's not going anywhere." His tone left no room for argument. The sheriff nodded once, understanding more than he let on, and rode away. That night, Lily tried to thank him, but he only shrugged. "It's your roof too now," he said. The words sank deep, unsettling something in her chest. She wanted to ask why he cared, what debt of the heart he thought he was paying, but she sensed the question would drive him back into a silence. Instead, she said, "You shouldn't have to defend me." He looked at her then, really looked. "Maybe I'm defending what's right," he said quietly, then turned away before she could answer. Winter tightened its grip on Willow Creek. Frost climbed the windows, and the land turned brittle and white. The wind howled through the ranch like an old ghost, rattling the shutters and carrying with it a loneliness neither of them dared to name. Yet within the walls of that small house, warmth began to bloom. She cooked, he repaired the roof. They laughed once, just once, when a chicken stole her bread. The sound startled them both, as though they'd broken some sacred silence. Then came the storm. It roared across the plains without warning, swallowing the horizon in black clouds and ice. Cattle scattered, their cries piercing through the wind. Josh threw on his coat, shouting over the thunder, "Stay inside." But Lily followed anyway, lantern in hand, her skirt whipping against her legs. The rain hit like gravel, and the air burned cold enough to hurt. She found him near the fence line, wrestling against the storm to close the gate. Lightning split the sky, revealing his face, grim, determined, half-drowned. A second flash, then a sound like the earth cracking open. The beam of the gate crashed down, pinning him to the mud. She screamed his name and ran, the lantern falling and shattering behind her. The rain turned the ground into quicksand, sucking at her boots as she struggled to reach him. He tried to push her away, breath ragged, but she refused. "You don't get to tell me no," she shouted over the storm. Her hands bled against the wood as she pried it up inch by inch until he was free. They collapsed together in the mud, gasping, trembling. He looked at her through the rain, disbelief flickering across his face. "You could have died," he rasped. "So could you," she whispered back. Her fingers brushed his cheek, and for a heartbeat, the world went still. Thunder rolled distant now, the worst of it passing. She helped him to his feet, his arm heavy around her shoulders as they staggered toward the barn. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet hay and smoke from the lantern she managed to relight. She knelt beside him, wrapping his bleeding arm with the torn hem of her skirt. He watched her, jaw clenched, eyes burning with something more than pain. "Why?" he asked. "Why come after me?" "Because you were the first to see me," she said, voice shaking. "Not the hungry girl, not the bride who was left behind, me." Something broke in him then, something years of silence had kept bound. He caught her hand, rough and trembling, and pressed it to his heart. "Then don't ever leave," he said. The words hung between them, dangerous and beautiful. She wanted to believe them, wanted to lose herself in that fragile warmth. But she also knew how quickly the world stole what it gave. Before she could speak, a knock thundered against the barn door. Clara's voice sliced through the night. "Sheriff's here. We heard the noise. You best come out, McKenna, both of you." Lily froze, fear rooting her to the spot. Josh rose unsteadily, blood staining his sleeve. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He opened the door to a wall of faces, townsfolk clutching lanterns, the sheriff grim beneath his hat. Clara's eyes gleamed with triumph. "There it is," she said, voice sharp as glass. Proof enough of what they're doing here. For a moment, no one spoke. Rain dripped from the rafters, tapping softly against the wood. Then Josh stepped forward, his voice steady despite the pain. You want proof, he said. She saved my life tonight. While you were sleeping in warm beds, she was out here fighting a storm beside me. If decency looks like sin to you, then maybe this town's forgotten what grace is. The crowd faltered, their anger dimming to uneasy shame. Clara turned away first, her mouth twisting. The sheriff nodded slowly. Looks like the Almighty's the only one fit to judge here, he said. One by one, they left, the night swallowing their retreat. When the last lantern faded, Lily turned to Josh, tears bright in her eyes. You didn't have to defend me, she said again. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. I know, he said softly, but I wanted to. Outside, the storm was dying. The wind had gone gentle, the air thick with the scent of rain and redemption. Inside, silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full, alive, trembling with the things they hadn't yet said. Lily looked at him through the flicker of the lantern flame, her voice barely a breath. What happens now? Josh met her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting in the faintest trace of a smile. Now, he said, we see if the world's got room for second chances. And as the dawn began to break over the soaked horizon, the light found them standing close. Two silhouettes framed by smoke and gold, no longer strangers, but something far more dangerous and far more beautiful.